Very good evening, and thanks for clicking on to the Monday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. Some interesting things now starting to come out with regards to the month of February, and a few statistics with regards to rainfall. Very mild month as well. Looks as if it's been the warmest CET mean temperature on record for the Central England temperature. Also, an interesting one here. Let's have a quick look. Actually, this is the current temperature over the last 7 days. Actually, I was going to say the temperature normally for the month of February, but this is the past 7 days, and I thought I would show you this to show where has the cold air been, because it has been continuing to remain very mild. But we have had a few cold mornings in recent times up here across, particularly northern UK, but it's been the most widespread frost over recent mornings that we've seen in probably a good couple of weeks. Coldest temperature appears to have been -8 at Braemar back yesterday morning, a little bit below freezing this morning, but not quite as cold as last night. But daytime temperatures are starting to rise, given the fact that the length of daylight is now increasing, nighttime decreasing, and even the strength of the sun is becoming a little bit notable in terms of feeling the warmth of the air at this time of the year compared to a month or so ago. Obviously, when you do get spells of cold at this time of the year, we can still get temperatures below freezing during the daytime, and well below freezing by nighttime. But we do have a relatively mild air mass in place, and when you've got these mild air masses in place in the sunshine, you start to feel the warmth of that sun. But in the last 7 days, this is the temperature profile compared to average, and it has been still very, very warm, both over Europe, over North America, and the core of the cold. A fairly large area, by the way, of below average temperatures has been residing over Kazakhstan, southern Russia, Mongolia, more or less all of China has been firmly below average, and notably below average, by the way, across the center of Asia. And this could be, may or may not be, a byproduct of the recent sun stratospheric warming that took place. Not one, not two, but three stratospheric warmings that have taken place. And if you haven't already done so, check out yesterday's global weather and climate report, because that looks sure a bit of thought with regards to some aspects that I think may be taking place with regards to the strong warming that we've seen back during the summer, autumn, into the winter season, and the possible effects the warmth within the troposphere has maybe had on the lower stratosphere, triggering three stratospheric warmings, but two possible major sudden stratospheric warmings. And the definition of a major is when the winds reverse in surrounding the polar vortex. But this could be a byproduct of that, where we're actually seeing warming over Europe and over North America. Now, the timing can be a couple of weeks after the actual initial reversal in the mean zone of winds. So there is still question marks with regards to, is this influence being seen now, or is it still yet to come? And that's even the question is, do we see a response? Because not every sudden stratospheric warming provides a significant response into the troposphere. But like I said, check out that video from yesterday. There is a little bit more thought with regards to what I think on a personal level is perhaps going on. There's no scientific backing to my theories, but nonetheless, I thought I would share with you what I think is taking place in terms of the atmosphere. Very, very complex situation. So it's my simplistic mindset in terms of understanding the physics of atmosphere, which is, the majority of 90% of atmospheric physics is way over my head. But I try to explain my interpretation, in a sense, of what I think may or may not be going on. But nonetheless, a very, very impressive area of cold over Asia. And if we look at the Asia in a little bit more detail over the last 7 days, you can see here the standout level of cold air, which is quite interesting. Notice here slightly warmer than average right up against the coast, the east coast that is of China here. Parts of southern China is warmer than average. So remember, this is the 7-day mean, the past 7 days. You can see very strong warming taking place over Europe and over northern Russia, but a notably below average across southern Russia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, most of China, into Pakistan, parts of India is also the case. Looking at Europe over the last 7 days, and it has been firmly warmer than average, with the exceptions of far western Russia. This is the month to date, and it will go down as one of the warmest Februaries on record, without a doubt. In terms of the slightly chillier flavour of weather over the past weekend, may help kind of just notch down 1 or 2 levels of warmest on record. I may or may not be correct with that, but my hunch would be that some of the colder nights over the last few days may have helped drag slightly that mean average temperature down a fraction, but it may or may not be the case. Also, an interesting one is looking specifically at Marfogan Weather HQ. This is the data for February of 2024. And what's interesting is this is actually 23, in fact. And one thing that's quite notable about this month is this was last year. The average at my station was 6.0 Celsius. That was the average, with a maximum of 11.9 and a minimum of minus 4.0. Now, what's interesting is if we look at 2024, and the average is actually 4.2 Celsius. So it's actually a degree or so below what was recorded at my station for the average last year. So this is actually a colder February this year compared to last year, and the maximum was higher. So instead of it being 11.9, it was actually 12.9 for a high. The overnight minimum was colder than it was last year at minus 6.8 as opposed to minus 4.0. Also, rainfall is notably more than what it was last year as well, at 93.31 millimeters. And obviously, we've still got another couple of days to go of this month, so these figures aren't final, obviously. But it's interesting nonetheless that with my personal station up here in the north of Scotland has seen more extremes during this February as opposed to last, but it's actually been a colder February compared to last year by a little bit of a degree, actually. So I thought I would share that with you. Whether you're interested or not, I don't know. But nonetheless, I thought it was quite interesting looking at these figures for my station here in Edmonton in Rossshire. So let's have a look and see a couple of interesting tweets that I thought I would share with you before we look at some of the charts. February has been a super wet month, especially further south in the UK. While it's been wetter than last year up here in the north, it has been significantly wetter across southern portions of the UK. In fact, it was a very dry February, to the best of my knowledge. February was quite dry last year, but for Rothamsted, I think that's hopefully how you pronounce this, they've recorded so far in February, this is as of the 23rd of February, may I add, 107 millimeters of rain. This is almost almost three times the normal amount of rainfall for the month of February at this particular location. What would that be, between Birmingham and London? And that is really quite noteworthy. So it's the warmest February on record for this particular station in the south of England, and at 270 millimeters compared to average. St Athan in South Wales has recorded, I believe, its 22 consecutive days of rainfall, and that means that for this particular time frame when this tweet was put out, it's actually one day where it hasn't rained in out of 23 days during the month of February, which is pretty remarkable actually when you think about that. So I'll be very interested to see the statistics from the Met Office when they come out, not only about February, but also for the winter overall. Have you noticed the nights getting longer? Certainly have been, and these figures here make it all the more real when you look at the increase. This is actually the increase this week that we'll see, and I believe this is a time frame where we're seeing the greatest increase in daylight at any time of the year around about late February time. So Lerwick is going to gain 38.35 seconds of daylight over the next week, over the next 7 days. So that is quite remarkable. Nearly 40 minutes gain in daylight in just a week at Lerwick, whereas London is just over 27 minutes, so nearly a half an hour, nearly 40 minutes up in Lerwick. Cardiff 27 minutes of added or increased daylight over a 20, not a 24, a 7 day time frame. So that's pretty impressive stuff, actually, isn't it? And also, it looks as if the central England temperature, the mean temperature for the month of February, is at record levels. So we'll continue to watch this space over the next few days. So let's have a look and see what the charts are showing. I'm going to show you the comparison between the GFS and the ECMWF for the next week or so here. Let's start off with the here and now. Area of low pressure bringing further rain across the far south of the UK over the last 24 hours or so. We had another chilly-ish day across the north of the UK, but not quite as cold as yesterday morning's -8 at Braemar, Aberdeenshire. But you notice here we've got an area of high pressure kind of poking its nose, extending from the central Atlantic all the way across into Scandinavia, keeping things relatively quiet as we end the month of February and meteorological winter. But notice here that the GFS is indicating that by the time this is the ECMWF, not the GFS. You can see here a frontal system moves through. It doesn't look as if it's particularly potent, but nonetheless it's going to move across the top of the UK. And as that front moves into higher pressure further south, a lot of its moisture is going to get wrung out within the atmosphere as it enters that higher atmospheric field. So you can see here as we move towards the middle portions of this week, the next front moves in from the west here, and then it looks as if we have got a little bit more active weather as an area of low pressure relatively deep between Scotland and Iceland starts to wind up, squeeze the isobars together, increasing the wind, and also a spell of wet and windy conditions by the time we reach late Wednesday into early Thursday. Now notice here as we continue to play through the loop, that area of low pressure is bumping up against higher pressure further north and east, so therefore it slows down the eastward progress of that low, but it actually continues to deepen. If you notice now, 965 millibars between Scotland and Iceland here. Fairly windy conditions, but also colder air getting drawn in off Greenland. There's that area of high pressure now out over the Atlantic. So with low position where it is, the high position where it is, these two features relatively strong, both with the low and the high. The high at 1043 millibars, the low at 965 millibars, and we have a squeeze in the isobars. And look at where the winds are coming from. They're coming from the northwest. So the ECMWF is indicating that precipitation changes a little bit more wintry, especially over the high ground during the course of Thursday. So obviously you've got a little bit of a battle between the cold air mass and the time of the year. So therefore it's not going to be overly cold. I don't think this air mass is cold enough to bring anything notable at low levels in terms of wintry precipitation. Because if you look at the 850 temperatures, it is relatively cool air, but nothing significantly cold. We don't have any of these deep blues or light purples. If we did, it would be a far different story in terms of the feel of the air. Nonetheless, it will feel chilly, but that's about it really. Back to the overview chart, you can see here, we continue to play through this loop. That area of low pressure may deepen further, but then notice here that it starts to dive southwards. And that is quite interesting because that may slightly change the dynamic of the air mass itself. But remember, this chilly air mass spending time over relatively warm Atlantic waters or even North Sea waters, it means that it loses a lot of the chill within the air as it continues to spin around. You notice here that it's kind of bobbling around. Nothing really changes. It stays relatively unsettled, but nothing majorly wet, but nonetheless unsettled. Notice here that the pressure continues to rise as this area of low pressure starts to fill somewhat, but the very, very end of this loop, you notice what's starting to take place. We're starting to gain higher pressure over the continent here, and that may start to be a little bit of a game changer as we move towards the end of week 1 of March. Higher pressure building over the continent. Now, if we look at the GFS view, it's a little bit different. In terms, it has the same overall idea. Frontal system number 1 moves through. Then as we move towards the middle portion of the week, system number 2 moves through, and we see that area of low pressure moving between Iceland and Scotland. Very similar idea, if you notice. Area of high pressure over the central Atlantic, area of low pressure between Scotland and Iceland, northwesterly airflow, relatively chilly air mass at that, and we're also seeing precipitation changing over to snowfall. Now, if we look at the 850s of the GFS chart as opposed to the ECMWF, you can see here that we have got slightly colder air associated with this system as that low continues to tap polar maritime air, Greenland sourced air, which obviously, as it crosses over the warm North Atlantic waters, it loses a lot of its chill. But it looks as if the GFS has a little bit of a colder air mass than the ECMWF, and therefore wintry precipitation may be a little bit further south. So if we look at the UK specifically and go back to the overview chart, you can actually see that it's showing slightly winterier weather, if that's the right word. You can see here that we have got something in the way of snowfall across northern portions of England and Scotland here, and possibly a wintry mix even down to lower levels. But I kind of believe this when I see it. But you can see that that area of low pressure continues to spin around, bringing wet and windy conditions across the board. If we look at the snow depth chart, just out of interest, I've not actually looked at this yet, but you can see here that it is picking up on some snow cover. I would say any land snow, the best chance of seeing anything down to relatively low levels would be during the overnight period. During the daytime, it would be primarily over high ground, northern Wales, northern England, and southern and central Scotland. Above, say, 200 metres, for example, we may see accumulating snow. Over parts of Northern Ireland as well, may see some snow out of this if the colder air is present and that area of low pressure kind of drags that colder in across the British Isles here. If we go back out to the bigger, broader view, go back over to the overview chart here, and this is the little difference compared to the ECMWF with regards to that higher pressure building over the continent. So we'll play through the loop here. You can see blah, 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 blah. The same story as the ECMWF. Messy picture as we move towards the second half of this work week as that low deepens between Scotland and Iceland. But then as we move into the weekend, you can see here that area of low pressure doesn't really have anywhere to go. It's kind of trapped in place between high pressure to the west and high pressure to the east also here. But as we continue to skip through the first few days of March, notice here another system moves in off the Atlantic here. And then you watch this space. There's that area of high pressure over northwestern Russia starting to build in strength. There's a frontal system that's trying to move in off the Atlantic here, but notice here that high starts to strengthen over Scandinavia. May try to start to push back that front moving in off the Atlantic towards the UK. And I'm not necessarily buying into anything particularly cold, but nonetheless, it looks as if there's a Scandinavian high seen by the GFS becoming stronger, and it may start to generate a bit of an easterly flow. Looking at 850 temperatures just to get a rough idea as to what kind of air mass you're talking about, nothing really to write home about. So I wouldn't get overly excited about this, but nonetheless, it's an interesting scenario nonetheless with regards to higher pressure over Scandinavia building. But you notice here, any real cold air is actually well out over the eastern portions of Europe here. And you notice here there's green colours representing milder air between the cold air over Russia and over the UK here. So if anything, it'll be an easterly wind but very, very little in the way of anything significantly cold. Finally, let's look at the GFS over the upcoming 7-day period. This is starting off with the precipitation. You can see here that we have got close to average rainfall over the UK and Ireland here, slightly above average in some places, slightly below average, especially across Sutherland, Caithness, and Aberdeenshire, if you notice. Slightly wetter than average, like I say, across more western and southern areas of the UK. As we play through this loop, you can see here that we start to dry things out a little bit, particularly so across the north, and that is possibly due to a Scandi high developing. Let's have a look and see at the upper chart here of the GFS. This is the ensemble, obviously, so the upcoming 7 days, you can see here a weakening of the trough positioned to the north of the UK here, high pressure over the Atlantic, high pressure over Central and Eastern Europe. Continue to play through the loop, and you can see that pattern changes, and we start to see higher pressure over Northern and Northeastern Europe congregate. That area of low pressure then gets pushed out over the North Atlantic here, as you can see, and I'm not necessarily buying into anything in terms of cold. You can see here the 2-meter temperature anomalies upcoming 7 days. This is the upcoming 5 days, in fact, and you can see here average to above average temperatures. So this is the period between the 26th of February and the 2nd of March, day 6 through 10. Slightly colder than average, if you notice here, but nothing major. Day 10 through 14, the GFS ensemble actually has the temperatures rebounding above average. Finally, looking at the Arctic oscillation, you can see here that it's firmly positive at the moment. Looks as if it tries to trend a little bit negative as we move towards the end of week 1 of March. And looking at the North Atlantic oscillation also, you can see here that it's a similar story to the Arctic oscillation. It goes back towards neutral once again. Looking at the lower stratospheric profile, you can see here the initials. So this is current. Lower stratosphere, you can see a lot of blocking extending from East Asia across the top of the East Asia, North America side of the pole. It tries to extend over towards the Baffin Straits. I think, if anything, that's a west-based NAO, which doesn't necessarily favour particularly cold weather for the UK. But I think any type of relatively cold pattern would be during the middle portions of March. And remember, where the sun angle grows stronger and stronger by that time of the year. So anything cold wouldn't be anything to write home about here. So I think we are losing the window of anything significantly cold as we step into the spring season. So I think it's time to move on, in a sense, from winter and start really looking towards spring and summer. And right here on marfoganweather.com, we will start to look at the spring pattern and eventually the summer pattern as well. Coming up this Sunday, I do intend to have a live stream, so mark that in your diary. Around about 4 p.m. this Sunday, I will hopefully be live here on YouTube, so you can ask your questions and also contribute in the live chat as well. So hopefully that is upcoming this Sunday, something to look forward to. So I think I've waffled on long enough as usual, and I'll be back again with more weather updates tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. See you hopefully tomorrow with more. Bye for now.